1, 2, 3, 4, now she's ready, now it's time. A Boston girl who knows true crime. She got cash, attitude, but a push on it, rock blue. She knows Sunday, she knows summer, now she's ready, now it's time. A Boston girl who knows true crime. She got cash, attitude, but a push on it, rock blue. She knows Sunday, she knows summer, uniform. Penny after dark, rock.
Hi and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. This week's show is a book review, and I have to say I finished this book just last week, but right away I was like, all right, I'm doing the show on this. It was just one of those books where I was like, I have to talk about it with you guys. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. So the book, as you guys know, based on the title, is a Casey Anthony book. It is Presumed Guilty. Casey Anthony, The Inside Story by Jose Baez and Peter Goldenbach. So this book was published in 2013. I don't know how I missed it coming out. All I know is I bought a different book by Jose Baez, which is another book that I have to recommend to you guys. That's over there, kind of in the pile, ready to go. And I was reading it and I'm like, I know the name Jose Baez. I know it from something else, and I couldn't pinpoint it. And I could have easily gone to Google, but I was like, no, figure it out. And then it clicked. I was like, that was Casey Anthony's attorney who got her acquitted. So right away, I then looked it up and was like, oh my God, he put out a book about this. Instant Amazon add to cart purchase done. And I'm very glad I did. It is quite a book and one that I fully recommend to you guys. So we're going to do quite a bit of a deep dive into this book tonight, and then I'll kind of give you guys my thoughts at the end. There is a lot to cover because it is a pretty decent sized book. So I do have some pause points in my notes that I'll kind of stop and kind of chat with you guys. But yeah, that's what we're going to be covering tonight, Presumed Guilty. And I'll zoom in a little bit there for you guys to see that. So you guys in the chat, this is one of those cases that I'm fully aware there's multiple sides here of people thinking that she was innocent, people thinking that she was guilty and got away with murder. Feel free to talk about the case in the chat if you guys feel inclined to do so. Again, keep it respectful like you guys always do. So again, tonight's show will not be a story of Casey Anthony and whether I think she's innocent or guilty or whatnot. It will be a review of the book by her attorney, Jose Baez. So that's what we're doing tonight. But before we dive into it, let's see. Hello, Linda Capone. Welcome. I'm glad you're excited. I'm really excited to review this. Like yesterday, oh God, I forget who I was talking to. I was just like, I'm so excited to do the show. So excited. So I'm glad you're looking forward to it. Hey, Kane. Hello. James Watson. Hello. Always good to see you, hun. Let's see. All right, you guys. Yeah, you guys are talking about the crazy weather right now. Absolutely. Steph. Beckham is in the chat. Must have nowhere to be if you're in my chat. All right, you guys. And if you guys have read this book, by all means, talk about it in the chat, or if you're watching this after it's been live, leave a comment. I'm really curious your thoughts about this book. I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to talking about that with you guys. So, all right, again, there's a lot to dive into. So we're going to dive in. So the back of the book, I have it typed out just so I wouldn't like be reading like this, but this is what I will be reading to you guys so you kind of get a synopsis of what Jose Baez was looking to publish. So he's saying, for when you purchase the book, when Kaylee Anthony was reported missing in Orlando, Florida in July 2008, the public spent the next 3 years following the investigation and the eventual trial of her mother, Casey Anthony. On July 5th, 2011, the case that captured headlines worldwide exploded when, against all odds, defense attorney Jose Baez delivered one of the biggest legal upsets in American history, a not guilty verdict. In this tell-all, Baez shares secrets the defense knew but has not disclosed to anyone until now, and frankly reveals his experiences throughout the entire case, discovering the evidence, meeting Casey Anthony for the first time, being with George and Cindy Anthony day after day, leading defense strategy meetings, and spending weeks in the judge's chambers. Presumed Guilty shows how Baez, a struggling high school dropout, became one of the nation's most high-profile defense attorneys through his tireless efforts to seek justice for one of the country's most vilified murder suspects. I do have to say, that covers the book to a T. To a T. And there's so much in this book that it's one of those, if you could capture it in like a paragraph or two, how would you do it? He does that perfectly. Usually, you get the back of the book and you're like, oh, okay. I mean, you can't give away the whole book there. There's just always too much to cover. I was extremely impressed after I read through the book. I was like, that is on point. That covers each little thing that he then expands upon in great detail. So I was very impressed by that. So shout out to Jose Baez for that. So the structure of the book, as you guys can see, it is a pretty big book. So it is 430 pages plus an additional 32 pages of photos. And the book version I have, it's just black and white. So the photos are just black and white photos, as you can see, but you can make them out clearly. And again, the book is Jose Baez's story. This is not a Casey Anthony biography or whatnot. This is his experience with her, with the trial and everything wrapped around it. So I just want to make sure that is clear so you guys kind of can follow that. Let's see. Look at Kane right away. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Hey, Fiddle. Good to see you, hun. Linda says, I don't know. I don't know if it's true that Casey was giving Jose blowjobs. I never heard that, Linda. He does in the book later on talk about where at one point he gave her a hug and someone happened to snap a picture of it. And then like the headlines blew up where it was, he's having an affair with Casey Anthony and all that. But no, I never read anything past that. I just read his book about Aaron Hernandez, amazing book. That, Ella, hey, that is the book that I first got from Jose that I read. And that was awesome. So I point because it's over there for my books to review and recommend to you guys. And that's where I was like, how do I know Jose Baez? How do I know it? It was from reading that book. And then finally it clicked. That was Casey Anthony's attorney. I will always believe either did it or she had someone do it. Love it. I love it. Okay, so when I go over that book, you have to be here. You have to be here. So, all right, let's get into this. Again, there's a lot to get through, so I just have a few pause points, but in the meantime, y'all, chat away, chat away. So the book starts immediately with George and Cindy Anthony's Pontiac car being towed and then being notified Casey had the vehicle, of course. It discusses the smell in the car, Cindy calling the police on Casey regarding the stolen car, then it quickly turning into actually a report that Kaylee is missing. It goes over Casey lying to the police, example, working at Disney when she never did, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, that whole story. Casey was being held initially for child neglect and lying, which were just simply minor crimes. So she was held without bond, which is odd for that type of crime. That typically didn't occur. So now, which is really early on, we get into how Jose Baez got involved in the case with Casey. Casey had hired him herself on June 27th, 2008. Jose had a small law firm that was growing in Kissimmee, Florida. He describes his first meeting with Casey, how a lot in this case so far was not adding up to him and it just wasn't making sense. The first person Casey wanted Jose to call was her mother. When he did, the first thing he said he was going to do was he was going to file a motion to get Casey out of jail. And Cindy replied to him saying, quote, Oh God, no. Whatever you do, please don't do that. We know where Casey's at and she's safe, and maybe that'll get her to start talking. We don't know where Kaylee is and we need her to stay at jail, end quote. Jose made it clear to Cindy he wasn't going to do that. He didn't represent Cindy. He represented Casey. Again, he was taken aback because usually most family members, they want to get their loved one out immediately. And this didn't happen in this case. So George and Cindy immediately hired their own attorney. At first, Jose thought the Anthonys were the all-American family, but he always had this nagging feeling that something was off. George's behavior was off to him. Cindy's behavior was off to him. Lee, who's Casey's brother, at first with meeting with Jose, immediately went to law enforcement and was telling him all of Jose's strategies. So again, something's off here. George was also saying nasty things to Jose, about Jose to law enforcement. So immediately the family wasn't even cooperating with their daughter's attorney. So Casey's bond was set at $500,000. For this hearing, the judge said, quote, not a bit of useful information has been provided by Casey Anthony as to the whereabouts of her daughter. And I would add that the truth and Miss Anthony are strangers, end quote. Let's let that sink for a second. The judge making a statement like this goes against the Fifth Amendment in that the Constitution ensures a defendant's right against self-incrimination. Casey, for this, didn't take the stand or testify. The judge is not supposed to show any type of prejudice against a defendant. And to say the comment that the judge said in front of a national audience, especially, was completely out of line and wouldn't necessarily afford her going into a trial, people who, how do I word it? I think the best way to compare it, and when I read this part, I was like, this reminds me of Charles Manson, that case with Nixon, making the comments that he did, saying that Manson's guilty when he was still on trial, and Nixon knowing what he was doing, saying sometimes you got to win him in the press. It kind of, I know that's more of an extreme example, but it really reminded me of that, of somebody of authority who's making a statement publicly that they should not be making. When I read that, instantly I was like, okay, she's not going to get a fair trial. A judge should not have said this. Again, this is early on. This is just for the bond hearing. So this isn't even her trial. So keep that in mind. So Jose was firm with Casey from the beginning, saying that she'd already been caught in several lies. And when I say several, I mean, we know. So it was going to be difficult to prove things in the case because people now needed to take her word, and her word was no good. George didn't want to post bond on Casey, and Cindy, she respected her husband's wishes. And again, that was odd for Jose. So meanwhile, Casey stayed in jail. The court was using any jail phone calls that Casey made against her. We all remember those calls. And if you don't remember them, go on YouTube, Google them, you'll find them. And we know that now. I mean, then again, some people say things on these calls that it's like, do you not realize you're being recorded? But even back then when this happened, it wasn't that long ago where, again, anything you say on a call, you should know because the line says this call is being recorded. So, of course, the prosecution would take any phone call, and if there's something to be said or used, they're going to use it. Jose advised Casey not to see or speak to her own family. The calls were recorded and in-person conversations he felt were being taped, and the Anthonys were going to the police and the media with all of their conversations with Casey. George tried to get Casey to meet him without her attorney, Jose. This I did not know. So again, I know this case was so long ago and we all kind of, we remember the gist, but kind of looking back, I had to reread things. I was like, I remember this, or no, I don't remember that detail. So as I was reading the book, I did a lot of cross-referencing research on my own to kind of, not that I didn't trust everything that was being said in the book, but I wanted to look up for myself. So, and everything in here I did look and and confirm. So Jose, again, advised her not to speak to her family. So at one point, George tried to get Casey to meet with him alone without her attorney, Jose, when he knew Jose was going to be in New York. The media got wind of it, gee, I wonder how, and put it all over the news. So Jose got on the phone with one of the other staff members at his law firm, and George had been arranging this with the police. So Jose again called this associate from his law firm, Gabe, and told Gabe, you need to go and stop this. And Gabe did. The police didn't want to let him in, and they were trying to keep him outside. It was this whole thing. But eventually he got in to see Casey and basically reamed her a new one. George was being recorded, and one of the police officers were too. And one of the police officers said on the recording, quote, I don't understand. I thought he was supposed to be in New York, end quote. So I thought that was very interesting. And this was clearly violating Casey's right to counsel. Jose stated the police department never got in contact with him to get Casey's help to find Kaylee, despite his numerous efforts and offers to do so. Leonard Padilla was from a show on the National Geographic Channel, and he offered to put up the bond money for Casey. So Jose goes through this back and forth of, gee, I have to present this to my client, but how do I ensure that, this person isn't going to go on and do a tell-all or kind of reveal everything? Jose and Casey did ultimately accept the offer, but they made him sign a confidentiality agreement. The book discusses in depth the craziness with the media, that media circus that we all witnessed. It goes through that in detail from Jose's perspective. And even though Jose at first wasn't speaking to them, they still harassed him. That was new for him. So the book kind of walks through him just kind of not understanding. You get that vibe of why. But then he kind of clearly learns the game and can kind of proceed with caution that way. So when he would give them statements, he quickly found they would twist every single word he said. The media would also say he was a rookie Hispanic lawyer who didn't know what he was doing. And he took a lot of offense to this because he had tried other cases and was successful. But of course, he's like, you never heard about any of those. There was always, quote unquote, leaks to the media about the case. And Jose was saying these were things that only law enforcement would have known, implying where those leaks came from. Jose was friends with Geraldo Rivera. I know. And there's a picture in the book of him and Geraldo. Let me show it to you. It was, when I saw that, I was just like, oh, geez. And of course, it's like a big picture in his book. And I was just, oh, God. Oh, where is it? But Geraldo, yeah, here we go. Oh, look at that. How sweet. Sarcastically, clearly. So Geraldo would give him advice on what mistakes not to make in the public in regards to the media. Because he'd already been through, again, OJ already happened, and Geraldo covered that incredibly and in great detail. So he kind of gave, again, some suggestions to his friend Jose to say, hey, kind of avoid this and what mistakes not to make. Again, I just at the beginning of the episode said this. One of the rumors that floated around based on a quick picture that was taken of Jose giving Casey a hug was that they were having an affair. And he talks about how that was mortifying. People were going to his wife and mentioning it. Even if they mentioned it as a joke, it was extremely hurtful. And you can see that. So it is at this part in the book that Jose goes over his entire upbringing, his education, how he really struggled and worked hard to get where he was in his career, including passing the bar exam to be able to practice law. I just gave you guys just like a sentence or two. There's a lot, and it really details his struggles. And it just really made you see that this was somebody who was going to fight and claw his way to work hard, genuinely work hard, not just take, the cheap punches, if you will, or the shortcuts. He was going to claw hard and claw his way to get the best for his clients because he had to do that for himself. So I found that some of it was when I say emotional, it's just to read, someone's when it's such a tough background and upbringing, and then to see where they don't let them stop them and really work hard to get to where they are and do such positive things. Amazing. Again, whether you disagree, agree or disagree with the verdict, just in general, the work that he does, the body of work that he does, overall, you can say is incredible. And it just goes to show from his upbringing that he worked hard to get there. One of the things that I literally, when I say I literally laughed out loud, yeah, it's one of those things in the book where you stop and you're like, are you serious? Are you serious? And that was when Casey got out on bail. Jose described the similarities of that to OJ's ride going home in the white Bronco. And I was like, oh my God, Jose Baez, really? Really? We're going to make that comparison here? Yes, we all remember when she got out on bail. We all remember that, but just, it's not quite white Bronco worthy. Let's just call it like it is. But anyway, so Jose got wind that the police were going to arrest Casey on stealing the forged checks and forging checks. Again, that's why she got arrested and got put in jail for that end. And he called police directly to say, I got wind of this. If this is the case, tell me. I will bring her in. He didn't want this big media circus. And the police flat out said to him, that's not true. Don't know where you heard that. We have no plans on arresting her. But they did that night. The media had already gotten wind. They were there ready and waiting. So everybody, including the world, was here to witness this and film it. And he was pissed. He was pissed. So Jose posted her bond again in case he was released. Then they arrested her again on 2 more bad checks. Jose posted the bond again. She got released again. Complete media circus. I don't remember all of this back and forth of her going to jail, getting out, going to jail, getting out until I reread it. It kind of, that jogged my memory. And I was like, oh, right. So that was kind of interesting to read it from his perspective. I just remember the one getting out and then going back to jail. But nonetheless, it was so long ago, details slip. So at the time, and this is what we all remember too, bloggers, there were so many organized protests that were happening in front of the Anthony home for Kaylee against Casey. Again, this is all on YouTube, on Google. You can find it, where they're just making the Anthony's, George and Cindy's life miserable, going on their property, shouting all these things, George going out there confronting them, Cindy going out there confronting them. Is there a right or wrong way to handle this? In hindsight, we can say, oh, they shouldn't have done this, or they should have done that instead. And this was very, who expects this to happen in their life? This was new to them. So to react the way they did, who knows how any of us would react, but it was just kind of to reread that. And it was just, it goes in detail about how they were harassed and confronted on their own property and all of that. So on October 24th, 2008, the grand jury convened. George testified against Casey. And after that day, Casey never spoke to him again. So Casey had to surrender to the police, and that was a media circus in itself. Jose had hired the famous Dr. Henry Lee, and he was hired to examine the car. The book discusses in thorough detail Dr. Henry Lee's process of going through the vehicle, and that was probably one of my favorite parts of the entire book. Dr. Henry Lee is the guy when it comes to true crime. I feel like if people don't even know that genre, you've still heard of Dr. Henry Lee. He's that well-known and well-respected. And again, that part was my favorite part of the whole book. So if that's kind of into your thing, kind of the more hands-on detective work, kind of CSI before there was a CSI show, if you will, that is for you, hands down. So Dr. Henry Lee was able to see all of the things in the vehicle that the police missed. And he gave his opinion on the car. And he was upfront with Jose right at the beginning, saying, before I do this, anything I find will be reported. Again, well-respected man of his word. The prosecution went to Jose at this point and said, quote, in exchange for Casey telling us where Kaylee's body is used, they might let her plead to count 3 and she will only have to serve 13 years. So Keyword might. They know what they're doing. They know, we're all smart enough to know, all right, you're not guaranteeing anything because you're putting in that caveat, that one word. Casey said no. Jose, as her attorney, had to bring her that offer, and she immediately said no because she said she didn't know where Kaylee was. So the negotiations never went anywhere. There's a whole chapter called the Whack Pack. Jose went into great detail on several people who were trying, or even through the Anthony family means, inserting themselves into the case. That is nothing new, but we see that played out a lot with high-profile cases, and this was no different. For example, people offering to be of assistance, but there was always a motive behind it. There was more people that Jose didn't get to cover in this book that kind of did that, but he kind of covered the more prominent people who were inserting themselves in the case. And a lot of the time, these other people were then going to the media and selling their, quote, stories, end quote, about Casey. Jose discusses Zanny the nanny, the whole Xanax claim, and he disputes that up front. The book goes a lot into Roy Kronk. So just a reminder, Roy Kronk was the meter reader on several occasions spanning months. He was the one that called the police by the woods to say he saw something suspicious. Several times the police went out, they found nothing. Even search parties went out and searched that exact area, found nothing. Roy would even tell people before Kaylee was found, I'm going to be famous. I'm going to get that reward money for finding Kaylee's body. So keep that in mind because Roy Kronk will come up throughout this entire book, but it goes a lot into detail of Roy Kronk and his background and anything leading to him being in the area of where Kaylee's body was found. So just before Kaylee's body was found, so the Anthonys, Cindy, and George had hired a criminal defense attorney, Mark. I'm totally going to butcher this last name, Nejame. It's Nejame. He went on a media blitz, and his relationship with Jose was completely contentious, and they constantly bashed with each other. And Mark would constantly bash Casey in the press. So when Kaylee's body was just about to be found, so prior to that, the Anthonys fired Mark. He was trying to get the Anthonys to get Casey to fire Jose and then hire him. Well, that didn't work. Mark would go on to become a TV analyst during the trial. All right. The book has a whole chapter on when Kaylee was found, the news about her being found, Casey finding out in prison, Cindy and George finding out, as well as Casey's brother Lee finding out. That's the most I'll say about that. We all remember that. I don't want to get a ton into the specifics and the details about how her body was found, so on and so forth. I don't want to get into that here. If you remember the case, you have a general gist. If you want to get the book and read more about Jose's experience about finding out and all that, please do. Or if you don't know this case, check it out on Google, but I'm not going to get into that here. So, all right, just a few more sentences, a few more things, and then I'm going to do a quick pause because I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you guys. So, when Kaylee's body was found, so Jose right away knew he needed to have a team of strong people in the field to assist him. The worst case scenario had happened, and that was Kaylee's body being discovered. So Linda Baden was called to assist Jose, as well as Dr. Werner Spitz. And if you're wondering, Linda Baden, how do I know that name? She is married to Dr. Michael Baden. Linda has her own amazing career in itself. I'm fascinated with her. After this book, I was like, I need to deep dive and learn as much as I can about Linda Baden. She's a rock star in the field. So that will be kind of my next wormhole to go down is Linda Baden. So Next was the pretrial hearing. Casey waived her right to a speedy trial. So the prosecution was also denying the defense access to the body and crime scene. They kept saying, quote, "We don't know it's her," end quote. That was very interesting. I didn't remember that when I was reading the book. I'm like, how the hell was that allowed? So it was day after day after day after day. And again, Jose flew out Linda Bodden and Dr. Wonderspit. So there were people there, professionals there waiting to see the scene, to see the body, and the defense was not giving it up. They just kept saying, "We don't know yet if it's Kaylee." Even though it was announced it was Kaylee, they don't know yet that it's Kaylee. Jose, again, had the team of professionals fly out. Linda Bodden, Werner Spitz, Dr. Henry Lee came back out, Dr. Timothy Huntington, and forensic anthropologist Kathy Reichs, and investigator Pat McKenna. Again, day after day, they were told, nope, couldn't access the scene. The prosecution was told by the FBI the remains were Kaylee's on December 16th. They were required by law to tell the defense immediately, but they didn't. They officially announced it, however, on December 19th. So they let all those extra days pass when they knew. The defense was now learning who Roy Kronk was. Again, I kind of briefly went over. Now the defense is learning, who the hell is this guy? The meter reader in his numerous calls to the spot where Kaylee was eventually found. There were several versions of his story. So anytime he spoke, nothing was consistent. So again, as a defense attorney, Jose's trying to make sense of this and nothing's adding up, which for him, you can easily poke holes in the story, right? If you can't say the same story twice. So there were several versions of his stories, again, with so many inconsistencies, to the point where at the trial, the prosecution, they wouldn't even put him on the stand. They wouldn't even put him on the stand because he wasn't credible. He wasn't credible. So it was one of those, don't trust the messenger, but trust the messenger's message, was the type of thing. That was a huge problem for the prosecution. So we'll get to more of that as the trial goes on in the book. But Deputy Detective Richard Kane, the book goes a lot into this. And as I was reading this, your heart just sank because you're like, oh my God, he's going to take the fall for this. He's going to take the fall for this. And he did. He was the fall guy for law enforcement and lost his job over this. The police made the decision, again, that Roy Kronk, even though he was unreliable, his story was inconsistent, he was going to be the prize. He was going to be what they were going to go with in regards to wanting their story to stand. So even though Detective Kane was telling the truth about, his, kind of his role in this, it was clear that Detective Kane wasn't playing ball with law enforcement, and he was kind of being prompted to change his story. Police and prosecution took hold of the crime scene and they destroyed it before letting the defense team have access to it. So by the time the defense team was able to get there and see it, all they really had were photos to look at because everything was just completely destroyed by them. I didn't quite remember that until I was reading the book and I was like, oh, shoot. All right. So quick pause. Want to see where you guys are in the chat with this. Let's see. Linda saying Cindy really loves her granddaughter. Kane saying there were so many complications in this case, but that's why she was found not guilty, but she was, in my opinion. All right. Linda saying she didn't want to take the stand because she didn't want to lie. If found guilty, that would have been a slam dunk appeal. Oh my gosh. Just wait. Oh God. Wait. So, lot to go over because the judge was out there poisoning the jury pool. Oh, and there's so much more. Come on, there's so much more. Her dad said in one jail, so hello, beautiful. I found this a little cringe. Her parents knew her better than anyone, who she was. Imagine if this happened today. Casey would have been found not guilty, would have been celebrated on The View and TMZ. I did think that, James, in regards to how different it would have played out in the media now versus then. Whether it would play the same or whether it wouldn't, I don't know, but that did cross my mind. So that's interesting that you say that. Yeah, TMZ. Oh my God. Nothing like it is now. You're good. You're good. White Bronco adjacent, right? No. Oh God. And I know I'm a bit behind in the chat because I was reading, but hey, Bill. Hey, Undercover Mermaid. I will say for Jose, he did a stellar job. He got her an acquittal. Yeah, for doing his job. He did an amazing job at that. Whether you agree with the outcome from the perspective of what he's being hired to do, and like he even says in the in the back cover of the book, no one saw this coming, and against all odds, he got a not guilty verdict. So yeah, he did great work. I sure didn't, Bill. So sit back and enjoy. Never found the cause of death. Right, Kane? We're going to get into that. We are going to get into that. It's a book. Yes. Thank you, Kane. Hello, Tony. Good to see you. Hope you're doing good, hon. There was a Zenaida Gonzalez. Some people were threatening to kill her. Yes. It doesn't get into that in the book at all. At all. All it says is that Jose pretty much shut Casey down and was like, I don't want to hear about it. I know it's a lie. Do not ever bring that up to me ever again. And that's it. It never even touched upon what you're saying. But you're absolutely right. There was one nearby and she got, yeah, it was crazy. Hey, Firefly. Linda Bodden defended Phil Spector. Yes, and I did cover Phil Spector, so go back and check that video out at some point, y'all, if you missed it. Let's see. Oh, James. Okay, well, Linda, you don't have to go that far and lie, but it is what it is. All right. So to carry on. Oh, God. All right, folks. Let's all build Jane Watson's self-esteem back up while I continue on. So there was a whole chapter on the Anthony family secrets. So Jose, immediately the chapter starts with Jose getting texts on January 22nd, 2009 from George saying, quote, I'm sorry, tell Casey I love her, end quote. That was when George had tried to kill himself. Jose then learned that Casey, when she was 7.5 months pregnant and went to a family wedding, everybody at this family wedding could tell Casey was pregnant. There's even a picture in here. I'll show it to you guys. It's kind of hard to see because it's in black and white, but yeah, you can really tell that she's pregnant. And her parents were like, complete denial. No, she just put on weight. That happens when she works out. It was just, yeah, it's kind of, you can really see it. That's the picture. If you can't make it out on camera, in person, I mean, you can tell she's very, very pregnant. And her family was just like, her parents, no, George no, she's not pregnant. What are you guys talking about? And everybody was stunned, like stunned. And so Jose's just learning this. Jose suspected also sexual abuse from George on Casey. There was once early on when he was meeting with the parents and he mentioned just the topic of sexual abuse. And he's like, the room went silent. It was he's like, something just didn't sit right with me. So it was always in hindsight, 2020 type of thing. But now he really had his suspicions that George was and had been sexually abusing Casey. And Casey eventually admitted to Jose that this was true and details that in this book. I won't get into the specifics here. Casey also admits that her brother Lee would fondle her. So the internet search for chloroform. Jose goes over that Casey's boyfriend at the time had posted a picture saying, it was like a meme that said, win her over with chloroform. Casey didn't know what chloroform was and looked it up. So that's Jose's explaining that search on the computer. In regards to Casey pretending to work at Disney, Jose saying she pretended to do that because she didn't want to be alone with George when she had Kaylee, because she didn't want George to sexually abuse Kaylee as he had done to her. Casey also told Jose that the day Kaylee died, Casey was actually sleeping. She woke up. This is Casey's story to George. Casey woke up, found George carrying Kaylee. She was dripping wet. She must have gotten to the pool. The ladder wasn't secured, so she easily gained access. There were no child locks on the doors at the home. That was just common knowledge. So Kaylee ultimately could open the door and get in and out of the house at any time. George screamed at Casey, saying she was neglectful, wasn't watching her daughter, and she was going to go to jail. George also said to her, quote, "Don't worry, don't tell anyone, I'll take care of it," end quote. Casey had tried to call her mom several times at work, but it went to voicemail because she didn't know what to do. And there are phone records that actually do verify that she did, in fact, try to call her mom several times. So what Casey did was she went to her boyfriend Tony's house and just would act like it never happened, kind of separating her mind from the whole thing. Jose argues again, the computer searches and the time frames based on Casey's and George's account of timing, they just didn't add up. Explaining the duct tape that was around Kaylee. That duct tape was the same duct tape that was found in the Anthony home with George. George had actually been using that same duct tape at the Kaylee search team tents on the posters there. It also came out, and I did not remember this, didn't remember this happening at all. So I was reading this next part and I was like, what? Never came on my radar back then. But George was having an affair with Crystal Holloway, and at one time made a self-incriminating statement to her, his girlfriend. He then dragged her through the media mud. So she ended up going to court and testifying against him, saying the statements that he made. What he said was, quote, "It was an accident that just snowballed out of control," end quote. George also sent Crystal a text after Kaylee's remains were found. The text said, "Thinking of you, I need you in my life." Who does that remind you of? Ding, ding, ding. Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson. Right when I read that, I was like, oh my God, that is so Scott Peterson calling Amber Fry, saying he was in Paris when he's really at his wife's vigil. I was like, oh, birds of a feather flock together, for Christ's sakes. So that was interesting. So the prosecution now at this point is when they filed the death penalty against Casey. So a lot of focus in the book was on manner or cause of death. I know one of you guys earlier mentioned they didn't have a cause of death. So in the end, the prosecution never had a definitive cause of death. There was no DNA. There was no fingerprints. So at this point, as a reader, someone who's into true crime, I'm thinking, wait a minute, the prosecution went to trial and you never had a definitive cause of death? No cause of death. How can you... And I know, putting aside that it's Casey Anthony, putting that aside, we're seeing this right now with a Boston case, the Karen Reed case, where the prosecution is saying, yeah, we don't have a cause of death. Can't determine a cause of death. But someone's on trial for murder, but you can't. That just blows my mind. Blows my mind. And again, rereading this book kind of jogged my memory of all these things with the case. But it goes into so much greater detail here from Jose Baez's perspective of the prosecution never having a definitive cause of death. So him being able to then take that and use it to help benefit his client. So the defense experts were able to, according to him, have scientific proof that Kaylee's remains in her skull were actually moved. She did not decompose in the way that she was found. The prosecution was trying to explain the smell of the car. And then Jose, from the defense perspective, was trying to explain the smell in the car, as well as the, quote, coffin flies, end quote, that were found, the single strand of hair, and they each, which we see this in every single trial, prosecution and defense, they each have their own experts on their sides, and they always contradict each other. So take that with a grain of salt, but I got to read more about it from Jose's perspective and then the experts that he got on his side from what they were saying, because it does go quite a bit of detail into that. So Dr. Jeffrey Danziger, He had interviewed Casey and he had found a pathological level of denial. He explained her behavior in the 30 days that she was away from home and gave it to this level of denial she was experiencing. He was also completely certain that Casey was the victim of sexual abuse. So, at this point in the book, about 130 pages are just on the trial itself. It goes into great detail. And I have to say, it is so well written, so easy to follow, and a little bit more insightful because, I'm in Massachusetts. Obviously, this happened in Florida. When the trial was happening, obviously we all saw it projected a certain way in the media. Not saying that was right, not saying that was wrong, just putting that aside. So to read how the trial went from the lead defense attorney's perspective was very interesting because I remember, and then I was actually able to, God, such a nerd, pull it up on Google and kind of side by side be like, all right, when this person testified in court, kind of here's Jose's perspective. And then, all right, when this person testified, here's how it was reported in the media. So I was able to kind of go jump back and forth between the two. And I thought, again, that's just me doing way more work into reading than what anybody needs to do. But I found that very helpful because it was just like, wait a minute. Interesting, very interesting spin sometimes, not just from the media, but from Jose as well. So that was interesting to do. But again, about 130 pages are just on the trial itself. And it goes through everything: jury selection, the trial beginning, it having to be moved to another location, so on and so forth. With that, you got such a good insight into how Jose prepared for the trial. And damn, was that hard work. He had his work cut out for him. The struggles he went through because the judge was always ruling in favor of the prosecution for basic things that it shouldn't have. Jose wanted the judge recused several times, but ultimately that never happened. The prosecution was making things more difficult for the defense, like saying the defense had to hand over every single question you're going to ask all of the people on the stand. Who would be testifying? And the judge demanded and said, yeah. So that was interesting. And I do have to say, some of the things that the judge was allowing and not going in favor of the defense, when I felt kind of reading it, I'm like, well, wait a minute, to be fair, the prosecution was wrong in this. The defense this shouldn't have been sustained, or this shouldn't have been, so on and so forth. It was very interesting to read that. I was like, which, had she been found guilty, there would have been a million reasons for appeal, a million. But it was just interesting to read that part because it's so detailed. So Jose was working hard, about 18 hours a day, and he was getting physically sick a lot because of all of that hard work and just lack of sleep and all that. Representing Casey, given what he was given, he had to work hard to help his client in this. So a lot was written about the prosecution, again, not giving a cause of death for Kaylee and not even trying to present one. They just left it hanging. In the way that the lead prosecutor, Jeff Ashton, couldn't contain and control his emotions, that would show to the court and jury. Jose gives a lot of examples where Jeff Ashton would act inappropriately in court and the judge just didn't do anything. And there are some videos of it. So if you go back and look and research, you can find them. And it's just one of those, I'm like, wait a minute, how is a lead prosecutor being able to physically conduct themselves in a courtroom that it was, yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, let me see it for myself. And then I'm like, oh shit. Yeah, that's not cool. But so George and Cindy, all right, this I didn't remember. And then as I read it, I'm like, got it. So they were able to go on the stand, and which, as we knew, they testified. They constantly contradicted each other. What I forgot was that they were allowed to sit in the courtroom. the whole time, meaning they were allowed to essentially listen to each other's testimony. That never should have been allowed. Never should have been allowed. But then it also begs the question, you sat there and you just listened to your spouse. You need to be on the same page. You heard what they said, and you're going to get up there and say something completely different. But I mean, in the end, that really helped the defense. Again, it went through, the book goes into detail about the witnesses that the prosecution had, as well as the witnesses that the defense called up. And not just family members, friends, people in the community, law enforcement. It goes through, people who are experts in the field from each side. So it goes through all of that. And what I did like about Jose Baez is he was very upfront in the book, where he was saying the prosecution, they did an excellent job on this part, or gee, they messed up on this and this really helped us. But he gives the credit where credit is due. And it's not just like a 1 or 2 time things he slips in there, just to be kind, or, not, have too much malice or whatnot. But you really, when you read it, it feels genuine. It doesn't feel like a inserted, forced compliment. It really feels genuine even though he's there to ultimately help his client, he can appreciate when somebody is doing good work and gives the credit where credit is due. And you see that actually several times throughout the book. So I really appreciate that, because it made me more open to what I was reading from him, because I'm like, all right, he's not just saying, here's my way, the right way, and bashing everything the prosecution did. He's excellent job on that. And I was impressed when this prosecution lawyer said this or did this, so I thought that was pretty fair. All right, quick pause point. See where you guys are with the chat. Danny, when did you do Phil Spector? Oh God, that was maybe a year and a half ago. It was a while ago. It was quite a while ago. But if you go through, and that was when I pre-recorded these shows. So if you go through, you'll see it. I think I did. Was that a 1 or 2 part? I think it was a 2-part show, if I recall. Let's see. Casey is a criminal, hates kids. Disney would total hire her. Oh, Jesus Christ. I could listen to Danny say meter reader all day. How am I pronouncing it weird, James? Probably. It makes it rhyme with Ninja Intruder. Mita Rita. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Oh my God. Yeah, I probably say it very Boston. Probably. All right. Let's carry on. Just a few pages left of notes for you guys. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but again, this was a huge book, so a lot to cover. So, of course, we get to the part in the book where, like I said, about 130 pages were for the trial. Jose also goes on quite a bit of an explanation about the trial by media of Casey. And unless you've been living under a rock, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We all saw it. Whether we agreed with what was being presented or whether we disagreed, it was a complete trial by media. The media was obsessed with this case constantly. So the prosecution made sure to point out, and again, this just went wild with the media, that Casey Anthony was a liar and she was a slut. But Jose was saying, she might have been those things, but that did not make her a murderer. And what he was saying simply, no cause of death, no murder. I'll repeat that. No cause of death, no murder. And that statement, to me, when I read that, I was like, that statement is spot on. That statement is spot on. We're seeing that again right now, playing out with the Karen Reed case in Boston. And we've seen that with other cases. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. So I'm not a Casey Anthony fan by any mean, so no one come for me. But I'm just saying, from a defense attorney's perspective, he's absolutely right. No cause of death, no murder. So the 5 things that Jose intended to follow. So there were 5 themes, and he made sure to always go back to this. Something simple. Each theme was simple enough that when he would explain it for the jury, they could always go back to these themes and always loop it back. And I thought that was actually extremely smart and effective. So the first theme was the forensics. This had to do with all the evidence concerning the chloroform, the carpet samples, the air in the trunk, the textile fibers, the lack of DNA evidence, the phantom heart-shaped sticker, bugs, and Dr. Arpad Vasa's experimental air tests that there was decomposition in the trunk of Casey's car. The second theme, Kaylee's accidental drowning. There was evidence to back this up. Theme 3, the botched crime scene on Suburban Drive. And for this, he looked forward to questioning Roy Kronk. But again, the prosecution did not put Roy Kronk on the stand, as we know. The fourth theme, Casey's sexual abuse at the hands of George Anthony. This would explain Casey's strange behavior during the 30 days before her arrest and in jail. And then the fifth theme that Jose was focusing on was the final topic concerning the possible police misconduct and George's attempts to keep her from talking about the abuse. As Jose says, I couldn't wait to examine Crystal Holloway, George's mistress, during this ordeal to let the jury know what she had to say about the accident that snowballed, quote, out of control, end quote. So again, you get through the book, all the pages about the trial, and then ultimately, as we know, Casey was found not guilty. However, she was found guilty of lying to law enforcement and had to spend another 10 days in jail. The judge could have easily done time served, but no, he wasn't having it. He sentenced her to 10 days in jail. And the part in the book where the jury reads that she was not guilty of murder, before that announcement was made, Jose describes, the jury coming in and kind of, not looking at them, which he was trying to, they don't want to look at us because they found her guilty, like trying to overanalyze as people do in all trials. But he said when the judge got the sheet of paper or the slip that's where clearly it was going to say not guilty, like the judge did not look happy, like physically emoted, did not look happy. So that was interesting because, again, the judge is supposed to be impartial, and it was not the case for that. So the book discusses Casey once she was going to be released. Jose was going to help her get out and away from the media. But as he says, and it's actually a really spot on statement, she was always going to be, quote, a prisoner in her own freedom, end quote. Along the way of the case and trial, this goes through all of Jose's struggles. He fell behind on his mortgage. Him and his wife lost their home. His wife and him were pregnant and expecting a child. And even for the birth of their child, his wife had to be shielded from the media. His law office was financially hurting because he couldn't take on as many cases because when he took this on, it seemed like he didn't anticipate it would be what it was. And yes, he decided to stay. There were several times where other lawyers were saying to him, you should just bounce out. But he never did. He stayed for his client, and which there's something to be respected about that, but it put his law firm, really on the back burner. And it describes how even his employees that he had, sometimes there was weeks he couldn't pay them, but they were loyal and they said, don't worry about it. If we get paid 3 weeks, you get paid in 3 weeks. And they really helped carry the team. He had to cut corners, and he hired interns from Florida A&M University College of Law instead of secretaries, which on the one hand is a great opportunity for interns to kind of get experience, hands-on experience, and especially in such a high-profile case. There was a church nearby to where the courthouse was, and Jose started to go every single day to court, to church, sometimes multiple times a day, because he needed to ground himself, and said he needed to give himself the strength, not just physically, but mentally to continue. Because again, working 18-hour days, it was just, He found the days he wasn't going to church, just he was not on his A game. So he had to make that a priority. Since the trial, the book goes on to explain, he's represented several other high-profile cases that he's like, the media didn't quite pick up the way it did for Casey Anthony. One of those people was Gary Giordano, and he was able to get him successfully released from prison. Jose eventually stepped back a little bit and became a member at a college as well. In regards to his life, he just explained after the Casey Anthony trial, life goes on. However, he's most known for being Casey Anthony's attorney. And then ultimately, he went on to represent Aaron Hernandez as well in one of the later trials for Aaron Hernandez. But, Jose was saying he was able to open a dream office in Coral Gables, Florida, while maintaining his office in Orlando. His practice, as you can imagine, had grown big time. He was able to hire excellent lawyers who represented crime victims in criminal defense cases. His practice, as well as himself, would continue to grow. He, at the time of the book, was considering opening up other offices as well. Most importantly, he was slowly putting back together the pieces of his life that had fallen apart during the case and afterward. Because again, he put his whole life on hold. Family, everything. He said at the very end of the book, and I really liked the way the book concluded with this, he said, I am moving forward and continuing to do what I love, which is practice law. So if you ever need a robust defense, you know where to find me. As I did with Casey, I promise you I will give you everything I've got. She and you deserve no less. So that's the book in a nutshell. Ding, ding, ding. I said the word. So again, this book, if you're just tuning in, this is not the Casey Anthony story. This is Jose's. This is Jose Baez's experience as her attorney throughout this whole book. This is his perspective. And I thought it was an excellent, excellent book. So I clearly recommend it because I'm doing this video. Not only was it a great book, it was extremely well written. Everything about it was well written. It's easy to follow. It took me longer to read this book than I normally would have. You all know I love to read, but as I mentioned during the show, I was trying to look online at the same time and kind of cross-reference things. If I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember that happening, I would look it up and be like, oh, okay. Or seeing, especially during the trial with the media, when I was reading his perspective, I would go back to see how the media was reporting things at that time during the trial. Because again, not saying one thing or another about Casey Anthony, we know how the media was spinning the story. And could that have been accurate? Could it not have been? I wanted to get all aspects of it as I was reading it. So I was constantly kind of cross-referencing things. No one has to do that by any means by reading this book. I just felt it helped me, especially to re-jog my memory about the case because it was so long ago. But I found that helpful. But again, you don't have to. It's great. It's well written. This book covers from day one till when he concludes. And I know there's been, since this book came out, there's been Casey Anthony documentaries or, I hate to say sightings because that sounds horrible, but we've seen the news when we see when she's popped up and or made a statement and so on and so forth. Obviously, this book was put out before that, but if the book was put out later, I would have loved if George kind of talked about that. But it really seems like he's like, I did my job. This is where it ended, and I'm moving on. And he really did do that, and I thought that was interesting. Let's see. I liked that not only did it show his struggle with his upbringing and kind of fighting to get to where he was in life and in his career, it shows the struggle of what he felt and what he experienced with this case, like day to day, kind of being up against the wall. this was a good reminder for me of the prosecution's case versus the defense case and how it was presented to the jury. This book is similar in the sense that it's a bit of an inside perspective into what happened in court. And when I read the book from Jose's perspective, I completely understand why the jury voted the way they did. And especially when I would research back and see where I feel the prosecution really missed. Again, you can't, no cause of death, no murder. It was just one of those like, oh man, like I could see where the prosecution kind of dropped the ball in regards to the eyes of the jury. There were two, just to kind of put it into perspective, there were two books in regard to the Charles Manson case that were put out, one by the jury foreman and then another one by one of the jurors. And that was so insightful, both of those books. And I'm so glad I read those, because when I read those books, it really gave the perspective of, I can, like an insider's, I can see why they voted the way they did, because you're getting that information on how it was being presented to them. You know, it's one thing for us as outsiders to hear the recap of the day of, here's what happened, you know, here's what the prosecution said, here's what the defense said. Now I know with court TV and all, you know, all the news channels broadcasting cases live nowadays, we see everything, almost everything for the most part. Back then, not so much, especially before this case, we didn't really see much. It wasn't the norm. So to get an inside perspective of how things were being presented really does, it puts it into a good light of, even though I don't agree, or maybe you do agree with verdicts and cases, hearing their perspective, here's why I voted the way I did. Yes, you guys are hearing all of this on the outside, but this is how it was presented in court. So I'm like, I can see why it went the way it did. So again, this was one of my notes. I think I've already said it like 5 times. I would read and then go back and cross-reference online with the case. Not needed, just the nerd in me just wanting to do extra work. So again, I recommend this book. I really do. It was really well written, really insightful, gives a great perspective. And whether you agree that Casey Anthony was guilty or not, from a defense attorney's perspective, he hit it out of the park. And yeah, as he says, one of the biggest legal upsets in American history, a not guilty verdict. He's absolutely right. I remember when that verdict happened, and that was like, I was like, wait, what? How? But then really deep diving into this, I was like, I see how it happened. I have a better understanding of why the decision by the jury was made for not guilty. So yeah, that is that. Do you guys have any questions or comments on this? And if anybody's read this, you know, what is your thoughts? I would love to know. Let's see. Let's go back to where you guys were in the chat. I just want to make sure I don't overlook anybody's comments. What a waste of trial to even bring, what a waste of money to even bring that case to trial. Yeah. And especially where, and I know I've mentioned it a few times now, where I'm seeing this right now kind of play out with with a Boston case. I'm just like, oh my God, why bring this to trial and say, yeah, we don't know how this person died. No cause. We can't determine a cause of it. It's like, what are you doing? Yeah. Capone, that's, you know what? You're going to get a star for that, because you're absolutely spot on with that. What does Casey do for a job nowadays? I don't know. There was recently I think it was on the Peacock network, if that's the right word, some like Casey Anthony special in her own words, or, you know, finally tells all and her true story, whatever it was. I did not watch it. So in regards to what she does for a living, I don't know. Nor do I really care to look, to be honest. She works for an attorney. Does she? Interesting. As Linda Ronstadt would say, you must be a prisoner in disguise. I love your linking that. Who gets comment of the night? Not you. If you get a Peacock channel, they would. Oh, thank you, Linda. Yeah, okay. Yep, you already covered it. Linda, you got this. You got this. She did not hook up with her attorney. Fake news. Fake news. I think Pone said something earlier. Mr. Beckham, James made a great comment of the night. Yeah, he usually does. Oh, all right. Great show, Danny. I'm going to download the audio. Awesome. Let me know what you think. Send me an email. leaddannyafterdark@gmail.com. Or just comment on the video or what. If you're on Instagram, shoot me a DM. I would love to know your thoughts on this. Or anybody who's read this, I really want to know. I feel bad for that poor baby. She'd be all grown up right now. I know. I feel like at the end of the day, oh God, there was another podcast I was listening to, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan, and it was covering today's episode that got released was about the death of a child. What was it? The treadmill dad, and that's ongoing right now. But point being, Joseph Scott made the comment on his podcast that at the end of the day, people will remember the father's name. The father's one is on trial for his son's death. The son, no one will remember the death of the child. People will always link it to the person who did it. You know what I mean? And yeah, she would be having her own life right now. She'd be done with school, like you said, family of her own. And yeah, I feel like Casey Anthony very much overshadows Kaylee 10 times over. And that's too bad. It's unfortunate. Well, Bill, you are so welcome. I still say she's guilty. I'm not arguing with you on that. I am not arguing with that one. Trust me. Sounds like a good. Thank you, Wolf. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. I watched it. Awesome. I would love to know your thoughts on that documentary. Send me an email. Does the book tell if she was guilty or not? No. Jose does not say Casey was innocent or guilty. In his perspective, what he says is what Casey admitted to him. She was sexually abused by George, and that she woke up. George was carrying Kaylee. She was dripping wet. She'd gotten into the pool unsupervised and had drowned. And that was her story of events of what happened. So that's that. Awesome. Who else could it have done it and why? The book makes a compelling, I don't want to say compelling case, because it's not a book about like, let's get the focus away from Casey and get it towards George. It's not that, but it kind of circles back quite a bit to George. This case was one of the first cases that I ever watched as it was unfolding. I loved Nancy Grace's coverage of this, and Jane Casera. Yeah, Jose Baez discusses, he makes a brief sentence in the book about how he'd be ripped apart on Nancy Grace and how she Nancy Grace was Nancy Grace. Yep. So that's funny that you said so it was just one quick part in the book, but we all saw that. All right. Well, I think I'm going to wind this one down. I know I threw a lot of information at you guys, so thank you for sticking around for all of that. I was really, really excited to review this book. So I'm glad that those of you in the chat enjoying this review. And for anybody catching this who is not live, by all means, I definitely recommend this book, Presumed Guilty, Casey Anthony, The Inside Story by Jose Baez. So definitely get this. I got it on Amazon. I ordered it, and I think I got it like 2 days later. Prime is a good thing. So definitely get that. So, but again, it is a big book. So sit back and there's a lot to go through, And with this book, I would say you don't have to be on the fence of, I think she's innocent, that's where I'm going to get the book, or I think she's guilty. Whatever side you're on, I think you can get this book and enjoy it, because again, it's just the defense attorney's perspective on it. So, and I find that very insightful. All right, you guys. Well, thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. I will be back later this week for the weekly True Crime and Chill. So stay tuned for that. Everybody have a good rest of your evening. And until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.